Hi everyone, I'm your host Matt Salem, and you've tuned in to another episode of Our Best Behavior, brought to you by Behaviorally. We are the global digital-first leader in defining and diagnosing human behavior to help you achieve the most valuable moment in marketing, when a purchase transaction occurs. We are Behaviorally, the transaction experts. Each episode we share insights on trending topics within our industry and of interest to our customers. Today we're fortunate to be joined by former Senior Director, Insights and Analytics at Pfizer Consumer Healthcare, and former Group Head of Insights and Analytics at Novartis, Francesco Ventisette.
Hey,
Francesco.
Matt.
Hey, how's it going?
Good to be here. How are you?
Good to be here. Good to be here. Good to be with you. Mr. 27.
That's right.
Mr. Ventisette.
Ventisette means 27 in Italian.
I love it.
So my American name is Frank 27. But you could really be translated in every language, right? Franz 27 in German, or François 27 in French. So
I picture now you need a gold chain with the number 27 hanging off of it. That's what you need. Like, I need to see you walking around with a gold chain.
Maybe?
Yeah, like an Italian gold chain, like a baseball player might wear or something.
There you go.
That would be something sweet. We're going to work on that. We could see if we can make that happen. Well, look, thanks a lot for coming here today. Sure. We're here to discuss the Power of Packaging book a bit that Behaviorally is released. And essentially, this is a complimentary ebook that we've offered to our clients through our website. It compiles over 50 years of best practice learnings into a practical guide on how to create effective pack design. And you and I, we've been fortunate over the years to work on many a research program together. Happy that, first knew you as a client, now know you as a friend, and great to have you here. And, I was hoping we could riff on a bit today is one of the chapters in particular from the book called The Orientation Express, which for me, when I thought of it and I thought of you, I said, hey, we've worked on stuff like this together in the past, right? So hoping to have a little conversation around what drives the need for packaging that could be oriented horizontally or vertically, or frankly, both at shelf. And, we know that retailers can be part of what's driving that need. And I want to talk to you about your experiences there.
Yeah, no, that's great. It's how much time do you have?
Lots.
A lot of time.
As much as you would like.
Those are very interesting questions. I guess for me, it depends, really, right? The answer, it depends. Because a lot of times you change the packaging because there's a new brand manager coming on board. And the first thing they want to do is change the package. Don't know why. I guess it's one of the things that maybe they bring from school, or something that they feel like they ought to be doing, because the package is what's visible about your product, right? So they come in and want to change the package, whether it's the trade dress or the orientation in this case, like you're talking about. And it's always, to me, it goes back to the strategy, right? So the orientation specifically could be a tactical play that maybe the retailer is asking you to do because they have issues at shelf with shelving your product. So they may want to work with you to ask you to change the orientation. But it could be, it's always a big change, right? Changing the orientation for me could significantly impact your visibility, what you're trying to convey on shelf. So it's not an easy change. And I have an example of when I worked for Pfizer back then in the nutritional category, where we had our vitamins that were shelved in a riser package with a fit panel. And it's been like that for years. So the Centrum vitamins, right? And it was 2 bottles, one big one little one, sort of a bonus pack. And I think in the consumer mind, that was really etched in their brains, right? When they thought about the shelf, they remember that visual that was the horizontal logo of Centrum with the spectrum. And I think because of retailer pressures and maybe the desire to change the package and modernize it, that we went from that to a bottle. Right. And that took away a lot of the shelf presence. Even though it was more contemporary design and the logo was a little bit better, I think we lost in visibility at shelf. So in hindsight, maybe it was a bit of a mistake, perhaps, that we had to try to change later on in the game.
Yeah, that's an interesting example, actually, because prior to kind of chatting with you moments before we started recording here and thinking about Centrum, I hadn't thought about pulling the primary pack out of the secondary as a horizontal to vertical, but it certainly is. This is a great example of it. And, I think one can argue that retailers were forcing for their own desires, right? Because I think sometimes just creates more space for them to add more to the category. I think there's certainly a real sustainability play that comes into the game there. But to your point, there's these trade-offs that happen, right? And one of them was visibility. So really, when you're thinking about kind of the design strategy that goes into a change, call it taking primary out of secondary, call it just flipping from, horizontal to vertical to create more space. Are there any rules of the road that you would think about in terms of where you're trying to preserve communication first and foremost, or visual imagery first and foremost? Do you have any guidelines that you would offer to listeners?
Yeah. Well, again, for me, it depends, right? It depends on your target as well. So, for example, if you're dealing with an older consumer that can't see well, then maybe a bigger palette for you to have the communication that you want, very visible to an older consumer, that would give you that advantage. But it also depends on the rest of the category. I'm thinking about the oral care, right? A lot of the toothpaste traditionally, in my mind, were horizontal. And all of a sudden, you started seeing some packages of toothpaste that were shelved vertically. Like Tom's, I think they started to have different shapes, different packages. So to me, that was a way to stand out, because you're looking at a sea of toothpaste that look all the same, which is great brand impression, but then that gets interrupted by something that looks vertical. And now it's much more common, but I'm thinking about 20 years ago or so when they first started out with some different shapes in the toothpaste category, you immediately have that stopping power to. So it depends on your objective, the target. Do you have enough room to communicate, unpack what you have horizontally or vertically? Sometimes when you decide to make a change not driven by strategy, then that train leaves the station and you're stuck with trying to fit stuff on a package that's really not optimal. But because the momentum, right? Now you've decided to change the package, and unfortunately you end up making big mistakes because you're making trade-offs or shortcuts that really leave on the table the brand equity. And, examples of mistakes we made in the company with certain packages where we didn't realize we were eliminating some elements that in consumers' minds were important. Something that we didn't think it really resonated.
Sure.
It didn't come up in qualitative.
Sure.
Or in talking to consumers. We had to dig further. And we saw sales dropping 40%. We had to go back.
Wow.
It was our cough category. But
it
wasn't a horizontal versus vertical issue, but it was more about the communication on the package, where all of a sudden consumers thought that a certain product didn't exist anymore because they were looking for a descriptor that was eliminated.
Yeah, no, that example speaks very well, though, to the importance of communication hierarchy. And when you go from horizontal to vertical, that's one of the main aspects to think about,
right,
is how am I potentially impacting my communication hierarchy? Where do I want to continue to place the most emphasis? Or better yet, what do I have to place the most emphasis on according to the shopper? Right?
Yeah, and that's it. And we're not always rational. So we work with design agencies and brand managers, and everybody has a different agenda or sort of idea of what the package should look like. And then you end up disregarding what the consumer is looking for, and sometimes they're not even aware, because I'm a big fan of behavioral science, for example. We're not always rational. And if you ask consumers, why did you buy this package? They may not be able to articulate it. You have to tease it out of them, right? Mm-hmm. Because maybe there's an emotional imprint about the brand that happened 20 years before. And you have to be creative to tease that out. Once you unlock it, then that's the element that you want to play on your package, because that ties back to an emotional hook.
Yeah. And I think that speaks to the power of observation and the need to observe consumers, not just speak with consumers, right? I mean, there's a combination there that's powerful if you think about observational power and conversational power.
Oh, yeah. And simple things like, I remember, I think we worked together on a project, and when you ask consumers off memory to draw a brand or a package, right? To remember the package, what they come up with, it's key. That's what, and especially if you start to see it repetitively, there's 4, 5, 10 consumers drawing the same thing, that's an important element. And then I'm a fan of brand stories. What is your first imprint of this brand? What do you remember? Because what they articulate is often what they take inside, and the reason why they pick up the package first.
Yeah, I love that on the imprint piece. Yeah. One thing I'm curious about, Francesco, is when the conversation starts with one of your buyers, the retailers that are buying from you, and the conversation starts around, hey, we're thinking we want you to flip your packaging the other way around. I mean, in some ways, I guess the brand team probably freaks a bit, right? Because it's like, whoa, maybe our brand name is a long name, and now we have to fit it on half the amount of space going vertical across the pack, right? So is that ever a conversation that you can actually try to persuade a retailer, well, hey, here's a few reasons why we shouldn't, by, even if it's not right then and there, by using data to show like, hey, consumers are attached to these elements. If we flip the pack, these elements are going to have to be, by default, given the lesser landscape available, altered in a way? Or is it just like, well, we don't care, figure it out kind of thing, and the buyer holds the power there? And I guess that might also depend on who the buyer is, but I'm curious how those conversations start.
So it's a very interesting question, because in my experience, working in research, we don't go in front of the buyer. We don't go to talk to the Walmart category manager who's trying to figure out, how to shelf and the planograms. We don't get to do that. It's sometimes the brand manager doesn't get to do that, because it's more the category. Brand manager talks to category manager. They go and they develop their relationships, et cetera. So when that need gets articulated, it has to work back 5 steps back to me, and then I have to ask a lot of questions about why do we want to change it. And sometimes you can't, stop it necessarily, because, well, that's what the retailers want. If we don't do it, we're going to lose X amount of shelf space. So I think we could do better in getting in front and having more of a cohesive discussion with the retailers as well, because they don't always, companies don't always operate like that. It's kind of siloed, right? So it's a very good question. Like, hey, what do they ask you? It's like, well, we don't go in front of them.
Yeah, it's like a bit like the telephone game. By the time the message gets to you, it's either diluted or changed or maybe too late, right?
Yeah.
Very interesting.
But I think the critical thing is to keep asking the right strategic questions. Why do you want to change the package? And if you can't do it one way, what would have to be true for the retailers to solve the need? Oftentimes, the need is not maybe what they think it is. Maybe you can have a more creative solution to bring to the table what they really want.
In thinking back to the Centrum example, perhaps, or other examples that may be in the Rolodex of your mind when it comes to packaging and orientation, are there any other research techniques that you try to home in on? I mean, you mentioned the drawing exercise. I always love that exercise as well, because it really gives you a good sense of the guardrails, right? Like, what are those visual equities that we must convey to shoppers? And then where do we have some latitude to change, i.e. where they didn't draw consistently during the experience, right? Then you mentioned the imprint piece and, kind of asking consumers, hey, what comes to your mind when you think of this brand, which is great and critical. Any other techniques that you've used as a researcher when you're thinking about understanding those equities or guardrails?
Yeah, well, I think you guys do the same, observation at the shelf and stopping people and being curious, but also, sometimes put in one variant and swapping it for another one. The issue, there's so many different variables in a store, because we build these nice planograms, and then in reality, the store can be messy. Things are knocked down, etc. But behavioral science intrigues me, right? I think I think I want to experiment more with behavioral science to figure out what is really driving choice from a behavioral. What are the nudges that you can incorporate to get somebody to be curious and visible at first, pick up the package, be in that consideration set. And it's not always obvious,
right?
Because what we think drives choice sometimes is not, we rationalize it, but sometimes what you find is kind of weird. And if you said it out loud before, you thought like, oh, that's silly. They would never buy the package because you say X, Y, and Z on that's silly.
Right.
But in reality, that's what's driving choice. And it takes data to convince upper management that that's what's happening.
I sense a new podcast series in the future. Shoppers can be weird. I don't know how that one might go over, but it's intriguing by title.
We're all weird, right? I mean, we do things that they don't make sense.
Absolutely. I do that all the time. I guess as we close out today, I always like to think about my guests on a personal level.
Oh,
I know that you thoroughly enjoy surfing in your free time.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, what's the coldest weather, being a New Jersey resident, that you've ever surfed in?
Oh boy, it was probably in the teens.
In the teens?
Yeah.
My goodness.
Yeah, because I remember taking off my gloves and feeling my hands like locking from the wind. But I know tomorrow is going to be super cold. So when it gets to, the 0 with the wind chill minus, that's when I stay out.
I have a word for that. It's dedication.
Yeah, dedication. But it's a lot of fun. I mean, with the right equipment, you can survive, right? Without a wetsuit or the stuff that you need, 50 minutes is hypothermia. So.
What beach are you hitting in Jersey in the teens? I'm curious. Where do you hang out in the teens?
An hour from where I live. So
Okay.
Avon, Manasquan, Spring Lake, all those. I don't really necessarily go south too much because it's a long drive.
Okay.
But sometimes Long Island, it's great.
Wow.
When it's super cold, you just sort of drive back in your wetsuit, which is funny and sort of not very, comfortable, I have to say. But you cover your seats.
I would guess that the lack of traffic is a plus, because I'm sure there's minimal to zilch shore traffic happening when it's in the teens.
Sometimes, yes. Believe it or not, there's plenty of surfers in the water. Yeah, when it's cold. Yeah.
Wow. Well,
it's a lot.
On one hand, I'd like to see that one day. On the other hand, it'd probably be too cold for me. So maybe through video or something.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Come with me. Yeah.
Well, Francesco, thanks a lot for coming on today. Really
Sure.
appreciate you taking the time to come join us here. And once again, to our audience, thanks for tuning in to Our Best Behavior, brought to you by Behaviorally. Francesco, thanks again, and we'll catch you next time.
My pleasure. You bet.